Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. When you think of San Francisco, you probably don't think of the most moderate place in America. After all, the Bay Area historically has been a political lightning rod in terms of its progressive policies and the very unlivable outcomes of those policies. But what if the most radical thing that San Francisco has started to do is actually start to agree with conservatives on basic realities? There's a huge shift happening in the very blue city that you and I need to talk about today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information or you want sources cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out the corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. So, I was reading through headlines, scrolling through California news as one does when you're looking into politics, and there was a headline that caught my eye. It read, "San Francisco solved metro vandalism with one neat trick." Now, I, of course, was curious. What is this neat trick that San Francisco has been employing, and has it really helped with their vandalism problem, as well as any other problems that they've had on the metro or in public transportation? Because, like I said in the opening of this episode, San Francisco's reputation really speaks for itself. It's not known as the most safe city or the most clean city. And one of the areas that really has affected in recent years has been public transportation. After all, the public uses this, so anyone and everyone can funnel into the bus or on the trains. And in San Francisco especially, where it's really hard to find parking and it's usually known as a more walkable city, more and more people are riding the BART or the Muni. And so if you have bad policies in place or you don't clean up crime, then that of course is going to trickle down to affecting people as they take their everyday commute into work. But this isn't an unfounded reputation. It's not just that people feel like San Francisco is unsafe. This is also proven out in data. And so, for instance, in 2025, there was a survey of riders of the public transportation in San Francisco, and 35% of them reported that they had themselves experienced physical assault while using public transport. Now, that's bad enough. 35% is crazy. But what's even worse is that 74% reported having witnessed it happen to someone else. So even if it wasn't happening to them, nearly 3/4 of the riders of public transport said that they witness it happening. That's just staggering. But like I said, it's not really that surprising because San Francisco is the city with the 10th largest homeless population in the nation. And on top of that, they have had historically very soft on crime policies, soft on trying to solve the homeless epidemic that is going around. And so it's just the perfect situation for bad things like these crimes to be happening. When you let people who are drug addicted or who are homeless, or you let people who are mentally ill and unstable, or you just let criminals ride around and they are never taken in or never charged with a crime, and you continue putting them back out in society, then these are the results that you get. But as I read this article, because I said this article caught my attention, they have started to realize, the leadership in San Francisco, and specifically the police within the BART system, have started to realize that they need to do something about it, that it's not feasible. It's not a reasonable expectation that people should be getting on public transport and basically just resigning themselves to the fact that they will probably get assaulted or probably witness an assault. That's no way to live in normal society. And so they have started to make a change. What is that change? Well, they have put in place 6-foot plexiglass barriers that act as a way that anyone who's trying to get into the BART has to pay their fare before they enter. Isn't that so revolutionary? I mean, who would have thought to just put a barrier in place so that no one off the street can just waltz right in and ride for free when you're supposed to be paying? Who would have ever thought of that? Well, I think anyone with a little bit of common sense would have thought that that was a good idea. But historically, San Francisco has not done so great on enforcing the rule that says that you have to pay a fare in order to ride. And so, for instance, they tried to put previous gates in place a few years ago. Back in 2019, they were trying to have greater security. But the problem is that they were called out, and many activists and others spoke out saying that these gates were anti-poor, anti-homeless, and ableist. Now, how putting gates in place so that you have to pay the very minor fee to ride the public transport, which is a service you're being provided. It's not like it's something that necessarily needs to be free, although these people would say everything should be free. How that's ableist or how that is anti-homeless, I don't understand. But San Francisco has caved to this pressure because they don't want to be called these names. And so they removed the gates, or they didn't enforce actual use of the gates. And then on top of that, there's a practice of going around and checking to make sure that anyone who is riding the BART actually has a ticket, and that ticket shows that you paid. But again, this practice was heavily criticized. This time it was being called racist. It said that it disproportionately affected people of color and was a form of racial profiling. And so once again, the police department stopped this type of practice because they didn't want to incur that type of slander against them. Now, once again, I just call out how going around and asking, did you pay, disproportionately affects certain communities based on race makes absolutely no sense, because if you paid to ride the BART, then it doesn't matter. You pull out your ticket, you show your ticket, and you go on your way. But instead, it's just saying that anyone should be able to cheat the system, be able to get on public transportation for whatever reason that they want to. And then if you ask them, did you pay to be here? Now you are a racist. It's all so ridiculous. But that's what happens when you have a very progressive city, is that they have to live by the rules that they create. And so they made their bed and they've been sleeping in it. However, it's led to a bunch of crime. And so because of the survey, the BART Police Department recognized that they need to make a change. And so they have installed these huge plexiglass gates to make sure that you have to pay the fare before you get on. And so they've done that at 715 gates. So all of those gates have been installed at all of the stations across San Francisco. And it has produced some pretty great outcomes already. So this was done, I believe it was back in the fall that they implemented this. And already they have seen massive changes. Overall crime on public transport has been down by 41%, which is huge. You've nearly cut that in half. Graffiti and vandalism are majorly reduced because they've realized a lot of people would come into the stations for free, not paying anything. They're not actually going to ride, or maybe they are going to ride, but they're also going in to just graffiti up the maps. So a lot of riders were never able to even use the maps that show them where to connect. They want to have vandalism. And then on top of that, they were having to pay the expenses of having workers come in to clean up any sort of vandalism or graffiti. And now they're realizing we need less workers, less maintenance requests because there's less vandalism. Again, who would have thought of these things? Oh, maybe conservatives have been saying things like this. I don't know. And then, of course, on top of that, there's a monetary impact. There's an estimated $10 million that this is going to bring in annually in fare revenue, which is a huge deal because the BART is underwater and they're in a huge financial crisis with how to fund it. And so a solution to that would be that the people who are using the service you're providing should pay for that service, and that's how you would fund it. Wild ideas. So many wild ideas are being put in place here in San Francisco, but it is working. And so BART spokesperson Alicia Trost acknowledged the success of the new gate system. And she said, quote, "The numbers tell us that these fare gates are preventing unwanted behavior that impacts the station environment. Those people, the ones who would come just for vandalism or crime, those people are no longer entering BART." And so it's really cool. It's actually really cool to see officials who saw with their own eyes the problems in front of them. They saw the outcomes of the bad policies that they've been putting in place, the refusal to actually implement the rules that say you must pay for this service, as well as reduce police presence, because part of this initiative is they also boosted police presence in stations, as well as they have police regularly riding trains. And so that's where a lot of the reduction in crime is also coming from, is that there's a greater police presence. And so they are doing something as simple as installing a gate and putting a few police on a train to make sure that everyone stays in line, and it's working. Wow, it's working. It seems like common sense reform to me. Now, while the changes to BART are the most recent example of common sense reforms that are taking place in San Francisco, they are not the only reforms that are taking place in the city. And so we're starting to see a real shift in several areas, one of which is crime. And so overall crime, not just on public transport, but in the city as a whole, has dropped by 25% over the last year. So in 2025 alone, it reduced by basically a quarter. And then on top of that, homicides have decreased to record rates that haven't been seen in 70 years. Now, this is a really big deal for anyone who has been to the Bay Area, or if you've just heard about the Bay Area. I mean, it is written all the time, articles about how crime-ridden it is, how unsafe. I have traveled there several times, and I have family members asking, do you feel okay? Do you feel safe? Make sure that you aren't going out alone at night, because San Francisco is just known for being just a hub for all sorts of crime. So it's a really big deal to see crime reducing by 25%. That's not something to be ignored. So the question then is begged of how was it reduced? What is happening? And again, it all comes down to policy, because it always comes down to policy, because policy impacts our lives. It impacts every single day that we live and every area that touches the things that we do in our lives. And so new leadership has put a greater prioritization on police. The mayor of San Francisco put out an executive order that ordered an increase in staffing to the San Francisco Police Department. And he did so by emphasizing a few new strategies. So for one, he was allowed retired officers to come back to work without jeopardizing their pensions. And so they were able to come and step back in, because there was this huge gap in San Francisco PD where they didn't have enough officers. They were wildly understaffed. And so by allowing retired officers to come back in, you have people with experience, you have people with passion for the city who have worked for the city before. And so now they can come in but not be worried about their retirement. Additionally, he cut red tape in the hiring process, because there were a lot of hoops to jump through, and the actual training and recruitment of new staff was cut in half through these reforms, which is big, because if you want to be able to boost your staffing, then it can't be taking months, if not years, to actually get them up and running and put them out on the streets. And then he also boosted recruitment and marketing efforts, which is another huge thing, because we have seen the demonization of police all across California and in blue states generally. And so for the bluest of blues of San Francisco to actually try to boost recruitment of police officers, to say that we support police officers, that we want to make that a priority, that's a huge change. So by just October, the executive order was issued, I think somewhere in May. So it was like the spring. Just in a few months by October, SFPD reported the largest influx of new recruits that they had seen in years, which is wild. They're seeing a record numbers. And then on top of that, entry-level applicants were up by 40%. And so these new initiatives, these policy shifts are working. They're working to get more police out on the streets of San Francisco to be helping to reduce and stop and disincentivize this crime from happening. But that's not even the only thing. That's one way, that's one priority shift that has helped to reduce crime. But on top of that, there's also been targeted campaigns against specific types of crime. So for instance, drugs are a huge problem in San Francisco, because usually the homeless population is using drugs. And San Francisco has taken a very liberal approach on actually providing drug paraphernalia to homeless people, giving them needles so that they are able to shoot up with drugs, which is just idiotic. I don't know why you ever think that's a good idea. But because of that, there's huge amounts of drug crime that happen as well. And so they have a drug market agency coordination center. They have really focused in recent years on going after drug crime. This was established, I believe, somewhere in 2022 or 2023. And so in the last year, they made over 6,000 arrests that dealt with drug dealing, drug use, and other drug-related crimes. And so they've really been focusing in on moving away from this very soft on drug crime policies and moving instead toward, we're going to make a lot of arrests and go after this, not just for drug dealing, but also for drug use. And so hopefully we'll see a reduction in the amount of impact that drugs is having on the population to then create all of these types of crime. Additionally, retail theft is a huge issue in San Francisco, but the police department has also taken new strategies there. They've been enacting patrols that help to stop crime before it starts. And so if a criminal is looking at a store and they want to commit retail theft, if there are regular patrols of police officers, then obviously that police presence is going to help to deter crime. But on top of that, they also have a pretty cool advanced license plate reading technology that they've been implementing. So they've been able to actually catch people who have perpetrated retail theft and the sort of gangs and circles of retail theft that is more coordinated. So that has really helped to decrease that. They've also implemented drone support for first responders. So when police police go to the scene of a crime and they're the first ones there. They've also have drones in the air that are able to give them intel and insight on what's happening on the ground. So you can just see more, you can see more of where the criminals or suspects maybe are. And so it's been able to just give them greater eyes on the situations to help boost what they're able to do. And so those are a lot of the changes that have been made that show a clear shift toward law enforcement. It shows a clear shift toward supporting our police to say we want to stop crime rather than we're just going to let it go. But the best change, the biggest change, the most effective change has been in the emphasis on the prosecution of crime after the fact. Because the past DA, Chase Bouton, you may have heard of him, he was notorious for being so soft on crime. His main goal was to reduce incarceration, so he would continually support diversion programs rather than jail time. But as we know, that is not going to disincentivize criminals from committing crimes because they realize that they're going to get off the hook. They're not going to be prosecuted. Additionally, he eliminated things like cash bail. And so he was recalled because of how progressive he was, which to be recalled in San Francisco for being progressive, that is mind-blowing. That really tells you something about just how bad things were. But the new district attorney, Brooke Jenkins, has completely shifted the priorities. She has focused on working with law enforcement. And so when asked about the recent reduction in crime, she said, quote, "I have made working with the SFPD and other law enforcement agencies a top priority and am proud of the work that we've done together to drive crime in San Francisco to historic lows. Working together, we have shown our residents and our state what is possible when leaders prioritize public safety over ideology and politics," which is so refreshing to hear coming out of such a big city. And it's so refreshing to come from a district attorney because a district attorney absolutely should not be enforcing ideology. We should not be playing politics. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be about enforcing the law. So there are reforms to public transport in San Francisco. There are reforms to public safety with a reduction in crime. But crime isn't the only area where these reforms are taking place, because there has also been a recent emphasis on the importance of small business as well as economics across the city. This started in the 2024 election when San Franciscans actually voted for Proposition M on the ballot. This was a vote to reduce taxes on small businesses, which, again, a vote to reduce taxes in a liberal city, very unheard of. Usually voters, it's so frustrating. They usually vote for taxes because the taxes on the ballot are framed as like helping this cause, helping that cause, and they don't maybe realize that it's going to jack up taxes, or they just don't care because we're taxed at such a high rate that I don't think people actually realize the implications of what they're doing when they're adding taxes. They think, well, it's high already, just toss it in. It's a good cause. So it's very rare to have voters actually vote against a new tax in California. So for them to have voted for this was incredible. And what it did was it significantly raised the small business tax exemption threshold so that more businesses would qualify to be exempt from the taxes. And then on top of that, it eliminated registration fees and it simplified taxes overall. And what this was aimed to do and what it has been able to do is encourage business growth because it makes it easier for small businesses to get in the game and it helps reduce the burden on them through taxes and regulations. But that's not all, because while that was enacted by voters, then the mayor who was elected in 2024 has also taken legislative action to help with small business reform as well. And so he passed the Permit SF legislative package. And what this seeks to do is really just cut a lot of red tape that is in place. We see red tape everywhere in big blue cities. And so the goal is to accelerate economic recovery as well as support small business growth. And so when asked about it, the mayor said, quote, "When I talk with our small business owners, I hear the same story again and again. Working with the city feels like swimming upstream. The permitting process should be simple. Instead, it slows them down, it drains their resources, and discourages investment. I'm determined to create the conditions for success with legislation like the package that I'm about to sign and through the partnership of everyone here." And so there's a clear recognition, not just from the voters, but also from the leadership now in San Francisco, that business is the driver of economic success and economic growth. And that increased regulations burden people who want to start and run small businesses so much that is not beneficial to the city. And so what we should do is take away a lot of these regulations to make it easier on small businesses, which is so wonderful. That's a truly great reform for the city of San Francisco. So, considering all of these changes, what is going on? Is San Francisco turning, dare I say it, conservative? It seems so crazy that they're making reforms to all of the things that conservatives have been calling to happen for so many years. And there has been one major change that has really caused a lot of these shifts. And of course, there are different legislative things that we're talking about. There are little priorities here and there. And so all of those have added up to help move the ball forward. But the biggest shift brings us really to San Francisco's new mayor, and that is Daniel Lurie. And he was elected, like I mentioned, in 2024. And since being elected is when a lot of the change has started happening to a noticeable degree. Daniel Lurie is unique because he is a Democrat. He is not by any metrics a conservative, but he likes to focus more on a moderate approach to issues. And he takes the principled stance that there are many issues in government that do not need to be partisan. And so when you think about things like the things we've talked about, when you think about crime, when you think about government fiscal responsibility, when you think about small business and the economy, when you think about homelessness, his whole shtick during his campaign was this isn't a left or right issue. This is a common sense issue. We can actually all agree on the outcomes because the outcomes are driven by data. They're driven by what we're able to see. And so he liked to say that not only Democrats needed to vote for him, Republicans were welcome to vote for him as well if they could all agree on those basic principles. And so one really good example of something that he has done outside of all of the other wonderful things that we've talked about has been that he stopped that policy in place that gave out drug needles, free drug paraphernalia to homeless people. He put an end to that because he said that we can all recognize together, again, not really left or right, we can just recognize that enabling this kind of behavior was not going to put an end to the drug epidemic that we were seeing, and it surely was not going to help homeless people who are out on the street. Now, maybe we would disagree with Daniel Lurie on how to actually address and solve the homelessness crisis, but we would be able to agree with him in that point to say that that was a bridge too far and has only led to worse results. So he's very results focused. He wants to look at putting a policy in place, seeing what the results are, and then changing approach based on what is working, what is getting us to that desired outcome. That is a very pragmatic form of leadership. And so that is the approach that he takes. And so throughout his campaign, and then even now, he has continued to emphasize common agreement over party loyalty. And so during his campaign, he said, quote, "I welcome the support of every San Franciscan who is committed to restoring safety, ending homelessness, of shutting down open air drug markets. That is not partisan. It is common sense." So Lurie really symbolizes a very significant shift to more moderation, to a more political middle for San Francisco, which is something that is desperately needed, not just in SF, but also across our entire state, if we want to continue pushing forward a society that is going to be safe, going to be livable, going to be even enjoyable to live in the years to come. He represents a willingness to look at outcomes and not to be willfully blind to the consequences of your own actions through the policies that you enact. But here's the problem. Our government across California has not been doing that. They do things like raising the minimum wage, and then they just complain about the fact that everything is super expensive. They advocate for something like affordable housing, and then they whine about the fact that home ownership in our state is basically unattainable and that young families aren't able to buy a home. And so then they start to throw out more policies of we'll just pay for the down payment, we'll give them more money, and they just spiral the problem to be worse and worse. And additionally, they raise taxes on us left and right and then feign outrage at the fact that gas prices are so high when a lot of gas prices are due to environmental causes that are caused by our government, pursued by our government, that increase the prices of gas, as well as taxes that are placed on gas in the first place. So our government has not been taking the approach that Mayor Lurie has been taking. They have instead been ignoring the outcomes of the policies that they put in place and then continuing to complain about the outcomes and then blame shift of why those outcomes are happening on other people. when you are moved by ideology alone, it blinds you from the type of honesty and the type of pragmatism that is required for good leadership. Because now you are not going to take responsibility for the actions that you took to get us to the point that we're at. But instead, you're going to say, my ideology is above all, which means it can never be wrong. And so it must be someone else's fault. But good leaders don't do that. They take a step back. They try to look at why what they put in place didn't work and shift approach. So, with all of that said, is San Francisco conservative? I think not. Again, their mayor still is a Democrat. They are still a very blue city, and they have a lot of issues to continue tackling in the years to come. But I think that we need to look at San Francisco because it's a very important lesson in the fact that even the most radical cities can change. And it can change because of good leadership. All it takes is one good leader in place to start rolling back the effects of bad policy, to make a few changes here and there of what they're going to prioritize. And already you can see just the overflow of good outcomes that are happening as a result. And so I think that we need to remember that we should continue having supreme hope for our state. If the most liberal city in our state can start to move to a more moderate position because they are looking honestly at what is happening as a result of their policies, then surely we can fix the rest of California. It is the supreme example for how places and people can change, why we don't give up the fight, and how it all starts with clarity about the problems in front of us, honesty about the solutions to those problems and the root causes behind them, and then pragmatism in how we actually approach the policies that are going to solve them. And so this is why I do what I do here every week. And this is why you're here too, because an informed California will become a better California. We need to set aside our cynicism. We need to set aside our pessimism. There is no all or nothing mindset here. We are not going to say that California is too far gone. We are not going to say that things can't change, because if San Francisco can change, of all places in our state, then there is hope for the rest of us after all. But we have to be willing to work for it. We have to be willing to continue showing people the outcomes of policies. It means we have to be patient. We have to be patient because it's really frustrating when people enact bad policies or they vote for bad leaders and then they complain about the outcomes. But we will sit with patience and we will explain how the two are connected so that people get it, and so that people like the people in San Francisco can start voting for better leaders, for better policy, and enacting good changes for the good of the people around them. This also means that we take heart at the small victories and we look actively for the places that we can find middle ground. That doesn't mean that we compromise on what we know is true or what we believe, but what it means is finding areas that we can all return to as common sense, like the fact that no one likes crime, no one likes high prices, and also that we can look at the drug market and say that it's terrible that people are addicted to drugs. If we find that middle ground and we are passionate about pursuing that, we can persuade people to a more moderate position with time and with evidence. So for today, look at San Francisco and celebrate this as a win. And then for tomorrow, get back to work because we have a state to save. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you feel optimistic about what we can do if we continue fighting for our beautiful California. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of The California Conversation.